Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Late Night Brew, where we talk the brews first and then we get around to the business stuff after the fact. I'm Robert Bartonica, otherwise known as Buck. One of these days, I'm actually going to introduce myself like that, but not tonight. But tonight, we do have on the show Hugh Roberts, once again, who joined us with Lee. Tonight, we're going to discuss tenant-to-tenant migrations, the deceptively simple but annoyingly complex situation that you found yourself in. But first, before all that, Hugh, welcome, and what are you having?
Thanks, Buck. I am actually drinking a beer that a friend gave me, a Greek friend. It's called Sea Bass, and you can see on the can there an extremely funny depiction of a Greek man. But yeah, it's a very nice Mediterranean lager that I'm sipping on tonight. It's really delicious. What about yourself?
I would be remiss if I didn't do a Halloween beer for so close to Halloween.
Spooky, mate.
Right?
Yeah.
Pumpkin ale. Seasonal, it's despite what you think, it's not disgustingly pumpkiny or spicy. It's pretty easy drinking. You could kill a few in a night, no problem. So, tenant-to-tenant migration. What is it, obviously, and why would somebody find themselves having to do one?
Well, it's a unfortunate, ramification of how Microsoft designed Microsoft 365. So it's not really meant for tight collaboration with other companies, and there's other issues as well, right? The name that you choose for a tenant has to be, the name that you keep forever, and that's the same thing that goes out when you send a sharing link out. So that can affect the company's reputation, especially when it comes to like things like phishing or, those sorts of issues. But otherwise, and most of the time, we find mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures are the reason people do these migrations. We have, loads of them going on right now, and I think the statistic we recently unearthed was there was 50,000 mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures last year. I think that number's going up a lot this year because of the global circumstances. But yeah, look, it's a very common thing, right? And that's the majority of the ones we do.
Yeah, definitely. So what goes into a tenant-to-tenant migration? What are people looking at, and also what time frame are they looking at to get this kind of stuff done?
Yeah, so they're complex projects. People don't understand the ramifications of moving everything that they've used for years in a tenant over to another tenant. And there's
It's like when you buy a house, you're like, where the hell? Why do I have all this stuff?
Yeah, exactly. You basically, Office 365 is designed so that users can go and do their own stuff, and collaborate and expand and do cool things like flow or business process improvement. But what happens is all that stuff just blows up in your tenant over the years while people are using it. And then, come time to migration, because you've been bought by another company or divesting a piece, it's really hard to actually move that stuff out. It's really difficult. So what we found is that, the complexity is around the planning stage. What we really need to do is spend a lot of time planning, making sure that we're covering everything and covering the risks and covering the process before we actually get to migration. And that speeds up the migration. You mentioned time there. If you plan properly, the actual migration is quite quick. That's the fact. Yeah. So I don't know. You've had some experience with these, right, as well, Buck? What's your experience with the planning versus migration aspect?
Oh man, throwing the question back at me. I'm supposed to be interviewing you, man.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I've done quite a few of these, and it is, I mean, for a small tenant, we're talking like under 100 users. It's 4-5 weeks of planning and preparation and discovery, making sure that we've caught everything, we've identified everything we want to actually keep, what should be moved, where it's moving to. I mean, and then the migration itself took a night, to actually cut over and to get the MX record and finalize that Delta sync. But it was 4 or 5 weeks of planning and preparation and asking, and are you sure you want this? And I see this. Is this really what you need? And yeah, it was 5 weeks of planning for 4 hours on Friday night.
Exactly. The list of risks just keeps growing in those projects, right? What we found is that a lot of businesses don't know the integrations they have into the tenant. They don't know what business processes people do in the tenant and what they rely on. So if you just go ahead and go, oh, let's shift the data, what happens is, that whole tenant just falls apart. People lose access to what they need in certain areas. An application may integrate with your 365 and that breaks. There's a lot of implications, I guess, a lot of considerations for tenant-to-tenant migrations. Yeah. And one other thing that I haven't mentioned is, you can also take time to maybe improve things on the way. I don't know if this is sometimes a good chance to actually, we didn't have any governance in that side in the source. Why don't we implement some governance in the target so when we move stuff over, or security pieces, that we're now in a better spot than we were. It's also a cool thing. Yeah.
Especially, theoretically with a divestiture, it's like, oh, they never had governance around like this kind of sensitive information, or confidentiality and sensitivity labels of, we were always trying to do a manual user process, like, hey, let's set up AIP in the new tenant and have that fresh and ready to go. You're right, it's a fantastic time to set up something new, and have a process in place for when people stepped into it, but also cleaning house. I mean, like we said, how do we get so much stuff? It's like, do we really need this? Do we really need to do this process? Like, we could leave all that behind,
Such a good time to clean house. Absolutely. Yeah. But I suppose this, on the same token, there's stuff that you really need that's actually quite complex to get across. So you have to think about that process as well.
SharePoint workflows, Power Automate, all that stuff.
Yeah, and that can have a huge impact. Like, obviously, there's some stuff that's really easy to migrate. It has been for years. Mail is one. That goes straight across. OneDrive is pretty good. But the rest of it, that needs a lot of considerations. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot to go through, a lot of risks that need to be worked through. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about, of course, a lot of how important planning is, and we've touched on the process, but I don't think you've run through what the standard process actually looks like for, soup to nuts migration.
Soup to nuts. Yeah. So
it's an American phrase. So
yeah. Well, I guess the process that we run is a fully fledged planning process, right? So we go through your organization overview. We figure out what you need and what your organization is about. We figure out your end state requirements. So we go through, I guess, a process to map out your ideal end state. And we do that first before we actually do the discovery for a good reason. Then we go through change management and engagement. So we actually picture out what the change management process is going to look like, how you're going to engage with users. And actually, we need to engage with users in the planning process as well, to do things like interviews and surveys and make sure that we're capturing everything so the migration is smooth in the end. And then finally, we do our discovery piece, which is tool assisted normally. We get a couple of tools maybe running across the source environment to pick up everything. And then we map that out to your end state requirements and figure out exactly how it's going to look. So when we do the migration, bang, we're good to go.
So touching on tools, you've already said, it's a relatively unique process no matter what tenant to tenant you're going to. So how do you know what tool to use for, each of these?
Good question. And you don't really, right? Because every environment is different. Every project is completely different. Like tenant to tenant is not one of those ones where it's the same every time. I've never had the same project twice, I don't think. So what we found is that actually choosing a tool before you know what you're doing is actually the wrong move, right? Figure out what you're doing, do the planning first, and then choose a tool afterwards so you can fit your requirements. Yeah.
It's not the situation of when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
That's basically right. Yeah. If you choose a tool, then you're like, oh, we just have to shoehorn that migration bit into that tool, and it's not going to be fit for purpose for everything. So, and that we found that, right? I'm doing a project right now where they're doing it quite ad hoc. And we've had to change tools now near the end of the project to say, because it didn't fit their requirements. And also it's taken them so much longer in the planning phase because they're just doing it ad hoc and they brought us in late. And what we should have done was done that really concise, proper planning piece up front so that we could just do the migration quickly with the correct tools.
Yeah. Talk to any project manager. Planning is important.
Yeah, I don't like talking to project managers. Okay.
It depends on the project manager, but that's
Yeah.
there. But unfortunately, though, I think that wraps up about our time for the show. So hope everyone enjoyed themselves a delicious drink, and thank you, Hugh, for joining us again.
Anytime, mate.
Thank you very much. Any questions or feedback, feel free to let us know. The contact information is below. If you got an idea for a future episode, please send it our way. And don't forget to subscribe because you never know when your idea might pop up. So you don't want to miss it. Until next episode, take care of yourself. Cheers.
Cheers.